from my dad's perspective, he was biochemistry professor. And he's like, if my fourth year students are cheating, then I'm giving them a great mark that they can get into med school. And do you want students cheating their way into med school? Do you want doctors who have cheated their way into med school? That's the kind of like big, broader implication that, of course, people were like terrified about.
Win all in, play my cards right. Up the ante, one blackjack all night. Roll the dice, let it ride. Water the odds, I got snake eyes.
This podcast exists because of the team at CASCM. CASCM is a B2B content production company helping organizations create and share their stories. We aim to create space where businesses can build assets and drive revenue through writing and talking. Content creation should be enjoyable and accessible. At CASCM, we love helping make that happen. Learn more at cascm.com. I want to start today, just getting your baseline on AI, like where you stand, what's your perception on AI, and then we'll kind of lead into a bigger conversation. But AI is taking over, right? And a lot of people think oh, this is AI and it's writing all our college essays. It's going to do our work. It's going to send our emails. It's going to be AI agents. Where do you stand when it comes to AI from a standpoint of just any direction you kind of want to take that, because people are freaking out hey, this is going to do it for me and I'm not going to be able to have a job, right? College, applying to college, any aspect of AI that comes to mind that's this is what I'm thinking about when it comes to AI.
Yeah, totally. So I think that's complex question, because on one hand, I think that AI is awesome and great and so many opportunities for advancements in all sorts of different sectors, AI in healthcare, being able to predict, illnesses and diseases before they happen. I think that that's a really interesting, great thing and very, very progressive to use it in those scenarios. Where I find it gets tricky is kind of in my line of work where, we are an AI. So we're an AI detection tool, but we trained our own AI to be able to detect AI. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But what we find tricky and where it's hard to draw the line is, a lot of people, especially when it comes to content creation, leverage AI to kind of replace the humanness of content, right? So universities use us because they have such a massive problem with students submitting AI generated essays. And, at that point, it's kind of what's the point of education? What's the point of it all if you're not actually doing your own work, right? So it's tough when it comes to AI being so accessible to so many people, to so many young people who might not have great work ethic or are just not mature enough to understand the long-term implications of its use. So it's tough and it's tricky to draw the line as to when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate to use.
Yeah. Technology is leverage. And I think you've talked about this before as well. Using AI, I think you said you use AI on a daily basis. Maybe it's to think through things or to help you write or correct this or grammar or who knows what that is. And I think a lot of people are using AI more than they even knew. If they're using Grammarly as an example, using it as a tool, right, to help you. And I've heard colleges say, use AI to help you with this, but have it be a writing partner, not the writer of your work, right? And I think essay writers, cheating, that's been around. They're still out there. We have some websites that do quite well on Google, for example. And so these companies come out to us. It's mostly spam, right? It's all spam, especially from the essay side. And they want to feature their essay company on our website so they can get SEO and backlinks back over to their website, which is weird. And you just see it. And as I started learning more about it, because I've never used it before, I knew it existed, they're everywhere. And now they're probably using AI to write these faster as opposed to having the team of people that'll write the essay for you. I guess my point is this was happening in the 1960s. This was happening in the last 2 decades. So it's not new because now they're having it written by someone else. They've always been, if you're a student and you really wanted it to be written by someone else, you could do that. Now, I just think it's maybe more accessible. So I went down 2 places there, talking about leverage and using it as a tool. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, then that's the accessibility piece, right? It's okay, yeah, for sure. When I was in university, the option of, hiring someone to write my essay for me was for sure there, but I was a cheap student and didn't
Right.
want to pay somebody $50 to do that, right? Whereas now all you really have to do is go to chatgpt.com and, you know, put in a few prompts and sayonara. There's your essay, right? So I think the accessibility piece and, fair exchange piece is very different right now. Yeah,
Yeah. And it is hard because you can also see it, right? Like I know you see it, and I've used it long enough to know like it just seems so obvious in a lot of ways, but it's becoming better and better. And it will continue to get AI will become better and better at writing and not making it so obvious. Like ChatGPT is like transformation or the dashes or the over the perfect grammar, the perfect spelling. Like there's zero mistakes ever, right? That kind of thing. Or over explaining it or adding on sentences or the conclusions like it was like I just read two conclusions of the same article. Like, why are we doing that? Or reintroducing all the key points that you've already brought up. It was just like filling words. It's getting better and better at it. But anyway, like
definitely. Yeah,
that spotting of it is becoming harder, which is where Originality AI comes in, I would imagine. But what are companies, what are colleges seeing? Because there's also false positives that say, well, that was written by AI. And it's like, no, it actually wasn't written by AI. That was a human person. And now we have a real problem because now you're going to have lawsuits that are taking place to say, I wrote this and you're saying I didn't write it.
totally. And that is the toughest part of having an AI detection software because it is predictive by nature, right? So there is always going to be a false positive rate associated with any tool that you use. So any tool that tells you that they're 100% perfect all the time is lying to you because it's just not the case, right?
Yeah.
And there's always going to be a small margin for that. But we've built out so to kind of combat that, we've built out a couple of additional tools. So we have like a Chrome extension and we built it specifically for writers who were pissed off because they were being accused of submitting AI generated content when it wasn't actually AI. So we built out a Chrome extension for them that they could use alongside their like content creation process. So it would basically give them a link that they could send as like proof that they wrote their own paper. So it would give like a timestamp. Yeah, it would give a timestamp. Obviously, if you're submitting an article and it took you 15 minutes, there's probably going to be AI in there versus, a timestamp where you can see the content creation process take place. And so do you get a false positive, you can kind of send that as a supporting document that can kind of plead your case.
Yeah. No, I love that. So this is like taxes, right? Like you have receipts, you've written things down, you have a journal of what took place. So, and now we just are going to need that with our writing to prove that this was created by a human. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And like false positives, like they do happen, but they don't happen that much. There's a couple of different ways. Like if you're a client using this at scale, you can track your content that you've scanned based on like the writer who submitted it. And so you have a writer dashboard that most of their writing has been, flagged as like human created. And then 1 out of 50 shows up as 100% AI, then you can kind of like look at that and be like, okay, that's probably a false positive.
Yeah. Yeah. And then also like, I think professors or companies or people reading it, like, well, this isn't your writing, right? That becomes like you need a baseline perhaps, but you can improve. And I think people will be able to improve their writing faster if they're using AI as leverage to become like, there's a big thing with tutoring, right? Like where everyone has a tutor available to them now. You can actually talk to the AI and have a conversation like, I really don't understand that. Can you re-explain it to me? So they can develop their skills faster if they're using AI. So we should have an expectation that writers can get better, right? Like, which has always been the case. But I think, I guess it just comes down to what the perception is, like what the bias is. I think like, no, you couldn't have done that type of work.
Yeah.
I know Google Docs was a big one too, right? Like write your stuff in Google Docs because then you have the history of what you've written, which is another way to track like your receipts in a way.
Yeah, totally. And so our extension is like meant to be used within Google Docs, and then it will give you a snapshot of that content creation process.
I love that. Yeah, authors. So obviously Amazon's dealing with it, right? With all these books coming on, like I could go write a book right now and send it to Amazon and boom, it's there. But I didn't write it, right? Let's say AI wrote it and hey, I need 200 pages on this topic or on science fiction or whatever, and it can create this world for you. How will authors do it? How will they prove that it wasn't AI generated? Because Amazon asks it right now. We've helped produce some books, and that's a big question. No, you post on YouTube, was this created by AI? Whatever. Those things, those questions are becoming the norm. When you apply to colleges, which I've had kids do, they're asking you, was this written by a parent, someone at your school, by AI? How are people going to prove it from those bigger vantage points of thinking like an author going on Amazon?
Yeah. So I think that that one's really tricky. And I've actually spoken at a couple of like publishing conferences because this is such an issue that they're grappling with right now. Because like there's a lot of like legal and copyright implications with AI generated text. Like you can't copyright something that's been created by AI. And so publishers are really grappling with that right now and trying to figure out what the best process is and how they can ensure that they're not copywriting something that they actually legally can't, right? So they're kind of facing an existential threat there.
Yeah.
And, with the self-publishing, it's tough too. We got an inquiry a little while back from a journalist who had found a like mushroom cookbook guide on Amazon, and they were like, "Oh, this is kind of weird. Some of this language seems weird. Some of the advice in this book seems weird. Do you mind scanning this book for AI?" And it came back as like 100% AI generated. And so, like, you want to do a science fiction book leveraging AI. What's the harm to people? Probably nothing. But when you're generating like a cookbook that people are buying in order to be informed on what kind of mushrooms you can cook and eat, do you want to be trusting a human like PhD mycologist, or do you want to be trusting ChatGPT to not poison you? Right. So those are the kind of like tricky applications that can actually cause harm, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because it could start with the basics of fiction and all these types of things. You can get into politics, which, we've been watching this. It's not like a surprise that there's going to be deep fakes. There's going to be stuff out there that's just not real. And then you start questioning what is real. And I think if something, let's say it's entertainment, if something's entertaining and it was created by AI, at the end of the day, you might not care. But I do think it would be nice to know, right? Like, what am I dealing with? Because I think it's like, even in sports, the imperfection of the game itself is what makes it go. Like, it's not perfect. The best teams don't always win, right? This thing happens. There's a referee, of course, makes a mistake, right? These things take place, and not to sound all like this or whatever, but like the beauty's in the imperfection a lot of times. And it's like, wow, someone created that. Like, who's thinking through this stuff? And I think it's okay if AI is doing it, but I also think it would be nice to know. So I think that would be like, just like, hey, who wrote the book? Here's the name of the author. Here's the people that supported the author in doing that, whatever. I think that's good to know.
Right. And like, I don't know, when you look at some series like, Harry Potter, would it matter if it was created by AI or not? Is part of the beauty knowing that like, somebody thought of that crazy storyline and made these like beautiful books out of them? Or would it does it not matter? I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, I guess that's for someone to decide, right? Like, you've heard these stories about video games. Are like, well, I can create once the programming's in there, I don't need to have a programmer do it. I want my game to look like this, and here's my end, what I'm trying to do, and here's what the graphics will look like, and here's what the background's going to look like, and the game's created within minutes. And I think that's amazing that we'll have that opportunity. I don't know. I think there's a human element, though, that I think people will continue to crave more and more, because I think it does more. And like you're saying, if you're having AI write all your stuff for you, I don't know. Does that help you become a better writer? I'm not sure, as opposed to using it as, like a writing partner. And people are like, well, you're using AI. Well, yeah, because you use Google to, let's say you're researching something. Well, you use Google to research it. Why can't you use AI to research it? Like, I don't understand what the difference is, because they can get you the results faster. Okay, cool. That's always happened, right? It was Yahoo. And before that, you go to the library, encyclopedia, or Wikipedia at some point. But that's inevitable, that the way to get information is getting easier and easier. It's just, what are you doing with that information once you have it? Are you giving it to someone else to write it? But, ghostwriters is another thing. Like, a lot of authors, especially in nonfiction, don't write their books. It's written by a ghostwriter or multiple ghostwriters, right? So I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's tricky. There's so many different use cases and so many different ways that people are leveraging this technology. It's been really interesting to sit back and watch and see how people are approaching it.
What would you say to a college kid today, or someone going to college, and they are going to be writing a lot? Like, how should they look at it? How should they approach it? If they're like, hey, I want to take advantage of the technology, but I want to learn, I want to be a better writer. I want this to, what would you say to them?
Great question. So if it was my kid going into university or college, how would I guide them? I think that I would encourage them to think up of their like question and thesis and stuff themselves. And then, start to do their research and then get, an LLM to help them with like the shell of it. And then kind of like encourage them to fill in the blanks themselves.
Yeah. Take their own agency with it.
Yeah.
Use the tool, but take agency.
Well, and don't ask it for a thesis. Come up with your question. Come up with what you want to find out yourself.
Do you think universities get to the point where they're using it in the best way to help that student perhaps think the way that you're thinking? And again, you're not saying like this is the way to do it. Like it's like if this was my kid, this is what I would say. But do you think universities can get there in time as opposed to being so, and some are, right? Some are thinking about it, but a lot of them are actually, and it's not even just universities, it's schools, right? They're paranoid and like, you cannot use it. Yeah, they're freaking out.
Yeah. Yeah. So my dad's a university prof and he, has been doing this for many, many years. He actually just retired last year. Great time for him to get out. But he was like, I don't know who's cheating. So he was like, I'm bringing all of my exams back into the classroom because I just can't control it. And he's like, I don't know how at this point in my career to control it unless it's like done in front of me, And so he brought all exams back into the classroom for that period of time. And I think, it came out within basically a year. And so I think all of the universities and all of the educators had the like knee-jerk reaction to be like, no, AI, bad, replacement, like cheating, and labeled it as that. And I think that a lot of students were using it for that as well at that time. The educators that I've spoken to more recently are not using it as like not using originality as like a punitive measure, but more as like a identification of like which student needs support. And so I think that's a really great way to use it. And so being able to scan a piece of content to identify what student might need additional resources or support is a great use case. And I know that there have been a few profs that I've spoken to that are like, hey, I want to understand this technology so that I can learn how to understand AI better so that I can teach my class or my students about AI and how to use it responsibly and how to leverage it for good. And so I think there's definitely been an adoption of it where people are thinking more positively and proactively about it.
Yeah, and we'll need that because you're right. I mean, they're taking exams. They're at their house, their library, their coffee shop, whatever, and they have the camera on. But I don't know. Like, there's set up another device behind it. Like, they can't see that, and it's got to be very challenging. It's very frustrating too for the student that is doing it the right way. But I guess that's like, to do things right, you can't be wrong, kind of stuff. At the same time, you can still lose, right? I mean, if the game's not fair,
for sure.
I don't know how to do that. Yeah,
if the game's not fair. From my dad's perspective, he was biochemistry professor, and he's like, if my fourth year students are cheating, then I'm giving them a great mark that they can get into med school. And do you want students cheating their way into med school? Do you want doctors who have cheated their way into med school? That's the kind of like big, broader implication that, of course, people were like terrified about, right? So, yeah, I see jerk reaction. I see why the knee-jerk reaction happened.
Sure.
People are starting to chill out a little bit more and not be so anti-AI, but wanting to like adopt it and learn how to use it in ways that can benefit people.
Yeah. Ethics are going to be huge in all of this, right? No matter if you're a company, institution, of university, and for the AI, right? Like, and that's always come down to it, right? I think in anything that we've done, it's like, well, there's going to be bad actors. So the ethics are, it's not just, well, it's up to OpenAI or whoever those other companies are that are coming out with the different AI LLMs or whatever systems are going to be after that. We can't just blame them when it's not working well, right? Like, they have to have ethics 1,000%, but so does everyone else who's utilizing the system. But it'd be nice to have it.
Yeah, and I think that there's definitely a need for transparency in the development and the usage of AI.
Yeah. How did you know, and kind of shifting a little bit, you were running a content marketing company. And I think you were doing it for, larger companies, right? And creating a lot of content for them. And you're like, this is changing very fast and we're going to pivot, right? And that takes some courage, audacity, I don't know what, a lot of different things going on to say, because you probably had a good thing going. And I think you sold the business, if I'm not mistaken, to then like that decision process. Like, what was that like for you? How stressful was it for you? Like, how do you know like when to say, yeah, let's go do this?
So I'd been running the content marketing agency since 2016. And the toughest thing in that business was content validation. So you basically, in order to submit a piece of content to a client, it had to check all of the boxes. It had to check the SEO boxes. It had to check the non-plagiarism. It had to check basically everything that deemed it high quality.
Yeah.
And so when we saw like the wave of generative AI come in and we started leveraging tools like Jasper AI, like all of these sort of the OG LLMs, we were like, wow, this is going to change the game really, really fast. And then this content validation is just going to get trickier and trickier because now instead of clients coming to you being like, hey, this one sentence has been plagiarized from this article on the web, you're going to have your entire piece of content questioned all the time. And so we were like, okay, do we like weather the storm or do we just say, hey, this industry has changed and we have great financials from COVID because everybody went online and needed content marketing services. Do we wrap that up in a valuation and pivot and sell and then get in front of this content validation problem with a software? And so that's what we decided to do.
Yeah. What was that timeline like when you started seeing it to when you're like, let's take action?
Yeah. So we started seeing it in the winter of 2021.
Okay.
We started seeing it, and then we got the offer for the business in summer of 2021, and then we ended up selling, like the sale went through April of 2022.
Okay. And were you building Originality like during that time or right after it?
So we actually had started building Originality way before because we wanted just like we had been using Copyscape for plagiarism for so long. And we're like, this tool sucks. Like for at scale,
Yeah.
like this tool really sucks for agencies. So like let's just build a better, more modern plagiarism tool. And so we had started building it for that purpose. And then when AI started coming out, we were like, okay, let's hire a machine learning engineer and start like training it on content that had been generated by tools like Jasper, and then start training it against like a human model that we had created using content that we knew was verified human. And so we started training it like super, super early way before ChatGPT even came out. And then we ended up launching the week that ChatGPT came out. So it was like super crazy timing and, people were freaking out. So we kind of became one of the go-to tools for that. And we were super accurate off the kick because we'd been trained off of like the foundational stuff for like a year.
Yeah. So I would imagine you were doing this for larger companies then, right? Like your content marketing that
Yes.
was.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the compliance offices and, whoever that might be that's watching this. And I would imagine you were creating a lot of content. Like this wasn't a niche business.
So there were a few, like kind of our main clients were people who had like portfolios of affiliate websites actually. So like, a portfolio of 15 really high quality affiliate websites. So they were niche.
Okay.
And they were generating like a lot of capital for these people.
Okay. And they're creating a lot of content, obviously. So you're having to back that up. I got it. Okay. Because I'm kind of getting into the niche aspect of it all, because we run a content marketing, but it's more niche based, like dealing with the leader, the entrepreneur. It might be a part of a bigger business. It can also be a small business, but very specific. And it's not a lot of content. Like there's a lot of content there over time that builds up. But like when you look at that industry today, and obviously it's different because if you're creating like just boatloads of content, someone has to create that, and AI is obviously calling people to do that. But I think that to use your name, the originality of the content is what drives it. And I think it's also oftentimes the originality of the individual. Like, what is, and when I say story, it's not like their life story or whatever. Like, what do they believe in? Like, they might like travel and they're, or who knows, right? Where that goes down to. They have thoughts on leadership. Like, these are very basic topics, obviously, but that is what's at the core of it, of like what they think, what they feel, kind of like your Harry Potter story, like what's in their heart to tell, what story do they want to tell? Where do you see that industry going with just so much content out there now?
Yeah, so it's interesting. From what we've seen, a lot of the, not the clients that we were specifically working with, but that industry as a whole, so like affiliate marketing, has taken a hit because a lot of website owners who traditionally were spending, between $60 and $100 per article on the content creation side of things were like, oh, ChatGPT, this is awesome. Let's cut all of our costs down, generate all of our content on ChatGPT, and then just basically pay for a publisher. So cut the like writer out of that process.
Yeah.
But then we saw with like some of the Google updates that they got like heavily penalized for doing that, right? So I think that was just like they saw the opportunity, like anybody would, to leverage it to cut down their costs, but then got like penalized badly for it down the line, right? So yeah, so I've seen that industry take a massive hit.
Yeah. So it's going back to the original, right? Like, again, Google's creating tools of AI, right? Like, they're one of the leaders, Gemini and all that stuff. And they're, who knows, in Notebook LLM, which is kind of wild. And so, like, on one hand, they're saying use it. On the other hand, they're like, don't just use it to cheat, though, right? Like, we're watching it.
So Google is like, it's like one of my favorite topics, because on one hand, Google is saying one thing, but doing another, right? They're saying, yeah, AI, this is great, use it as long as it's good quality. But then we've created this study and a dashboard that shows like how much AI content is in the top of like Google search queries. And as that kind of increases, then you get hit with a Google update and then it decreases. So they're actually punishing AI content because they don't want it in their top searches, because if they're just regurgitating LLM content, then what's going to be the difference between Google search and going straight to the source, which is like going on ChatGPT, right? So they are kind of facing an existential threat when it comes to that, because they're backed into a bit of a corner where it's like they want to reward good content, but if it's happens to be AI generated, they kind of have to also penalize it because they don't want their searches being infiltrated with it.
Yeah. When it's created by AI, like, there's one say, like, how did World War II start, right? And that can write an article on that topic. But then you could write an article and someone could work with that article and have their own thesis, have their own ideas. What about this? What about that? And the AI is possibly writing it as well. And then it gets to this point, and let's say this individual spends a few hours creating that type of content. Like, does Google see it as originality? Like, I guess you'd have to see the article, right? You can't answer this question specifically, but is Google in that instance probably thinking this is AI generated? Or they're like, no, that's different because they were working with the tool and getting it, as opposed to they took 1 to 3 cracks at it with AI, maybe changed a few things and posted it.
Right. I have no idea. I don't know. Like, from what we've seen, it appears that Google can detect AI content because they've massively punished sites that have used it and published exclusively AI generated content on them. But yeah, like, where do they draw the line? I have no idea what their policies are. They know what their policies are,
Yeah.
Yeah, I have no idea how they're sort of like controlling it and policing it. But it does appear that they are cracking down on it sometimes. So yeah, I think that they're very wishy-washy with their policies, and it's not clear exactly what they're doing.
No, it's not. And what's interesting too is, like, you go into WordPress or wherever, and the first button you see, if you want to write it, let's say someone writes an article in WordPress, I don't know, people do that, or the meta description, for example, it literally says, if you're an Elementor, let's say, like, use AI. It'll just start writing for you in any Notion, like all these different places, or where you Microsoft Word, like Google Docs, like Gmail now, right? All these places have it to where just click a button and it'll just write it for you. So I think it's just going to become the norm. We're like, well, yeah, I wrote it. I clicked the button. It told me to do it. I mean, it's the first prompt. Like, you can Google Gmail, I think now is like the first prompt of my Gmail is to have it write it for me, or start writing and we'll take over.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, perfect point in case. Like I had started writing an email and it gave me like a suggestion. And I was like, yeah, that sounds way better.
Yeah, yeah. That's great.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what I think Google's going to have to pivot hard and figure something out because I think that they are under fire for sure.
Yeah, I was testing out because using Perplexity and Claude and all these different ones, and Perplexity obviously on the search side of things. So if you run the search on Google and then you go run the search on Perplexity and you look at the sources, which the sources are becoming a little bit more prominent that you can see, like especially on Perplexity, they're very prominent. Google maybe not as much, but they're getting there. ChatGPT, they were there. I think they're making even bigger icons to like make it more aware, like click on this thing, which I think is important. They were the same search results for a while. Now, I think Perplexity's kind of taken it to the next level where they're giving you, it's not 8 sources, it could be like 800 sources, and you could just continue to dial down into it. So it's pulling a lot more information and doing it faster. But it's felt like Perplexity's just running a Google search, even though it wasn't a Google search. Like they're pulling, like who's ever made it to that top 1 to 2 pages on Google is showing up on the search results for AI. So it's like, it's the same thing. It's just doing it at a way faster scale, which is definitely a massive improvement for a lot of people. I don't know what that means. I'm just an observation that I had.
But also giving context around it, right? And I think that Google has tried to do that with like, when you do a Google search and it kind of like highlights the relevant piece to it. But then these LLMs are doing it better because giving way more context around their answer, right?
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. It's just like totally just changing the way that we access information. I think it's great. Like Google's been like a dominating platform for so long that it's time that somebody comes up against them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good competition is good. Yeah. I totally agree. I have 2 daughters. I know you talk about women in business and leading companies, and you're in the, I guess this is a software business, right? If you would categorize that. And there's definitely been issues in technology with, women getting the opportunity, right? Even. So I have 3 kids. My oldest is a son and 2 daughters, and talk about this a lot. And I've talked to a lot of leaders that are, buying or building companies, selling companies, building new companies, kind of like what you've done, showing up on podcasts and all this stuff. And it's amazing. Like, what advice are you giving to, do you speak? Do you it sounds like you're an advocate, obviously, like for opportunity and all that. Like what comes to mind for you when I start bringing this up?
Yeah. Well, so I think that I have been very lucky to kind of be in the right place at the right times a lot of the time, but I've also worked really freaking hard to get where I've gotten. And I think that it's becoming more and more commonplace for women to be in tech. But, there are times where I hop on a call and people are surprised that, the director of marketing sales for this tech company is a woman, and I can see it. But I would just say, yeah, keep reading all the books, keep showing up, keep educating yourself, and get a business mentor. And yeah, keep pushing that glass ceiling, girlies.
Yeah. When you said that and you get on the call and you can see it and you can feel it, what do you not, this isn't like a therapist session, but what are you feeling at that moment?
I think it used to bother me a little bit, and I'd be bolder on the calls.
Okay.
Bolder and just less friendly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm less affected by it, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Exposure to it kind of stuff. Like you've done enough.
Definitely. And I think that also, I speak at a lot of conferences, and just being viewed as sort of a thought leader in my space helps a lot with confidence. And yeah, so the longer you do it, the more comfortable you get with it.
Yeah. Well, you're good at it and you have a knowledge of it and you've got experience to prove it. And it's you should listen to me, right? That kind of stuff. And yeah, I think it makes sense.
I've also done it alongside, the last 6 years, I've had 3 kids myself, and I've also done it while growing and raising babies. And I think there's power to that. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. Showing up on podcasts like this, right? Sharing your story, answering questions, we're just having a conversation, right? And I'm throwing different things at you and you have a wealth of knowledge and perspectives, right? Does it help? And where does it help as far as are you looking, do you have this end result, this ROI? It's well, if they do this, we're going to get this many subscribers or whatever. Does it help you with communication? I mean, I have so many thoughts on this. Obviously, I talk about it a lot, but from your side of things and showing up on long form podcast conversations that are audio, go to video, viral clips, you name it, are you doing it all?
Yeah. So I think in terms of ROI, that's not I think the reason that I wanted to chat more on podcasts and stuff is to get a little bit more like public speaking experience and like, chat with other people in this space and just like connect with different audiences and, understand other people's businesses a little bit more. And so I think that it was more of like hey, let's get out there, get some brand recognition, get chatting with other people who are doing interesting things. Does that kind of answer?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I love that. Like just the public speaking experience alone, just like that little thing of like become a better communicator. Like, what's the return on that? How do you measure that? You can't, I think.
How do you measure that? You just keep doing it. And that's something that I like want to get better at. If I'm speaking at, 2-3 conferences a year, that's not like a ton, but it's also something that like I want to get better at. And
yeah.
So I think just chatting with people, answering questions on the fly and just getting more comfortable with it is kind of what I want to do. Also, like I have also been at home a lot with little children. And so speaking adult language is like really good for my brain.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. Yeah. And what's cool too, you could be in Canada, we could be in North Carolina and have a conversation. Like this is like before COVID is like, what do you mean we're going to get on video? That's really weird. And then it was too much. I remember I called someone like kind of in the back end of it. It's like, I thought we were going to do a Zoom call. I was like, I thought I could just take a walk and we could talk on the phone like we used to do. Like, do we have to have a video call? It's got too much. But to that point, it is nice to connect with people we otherwise would not be talking right now. If we didn't have a podcast, you didn't want to be out there. And we have all these different tools to have this. And then it's one of the best ways to connect with someone this day and age with everyone's got their phones, people are busy, there's things going on. It's like, man, we can shut everything off and talk for whatever length amount of time that's going to be and have a real conversation that's going to, I mean, personally, it's going to stick with me for a long time. And then I'm going to go back to it. So it's going to have different ways of repeating in my mind because I'm going to go listen to it later. I'm going to make sure everything's good, have our team work on it. And I think there's just so much there for that. It's like hard to measure. And it's a good way to tell the story of your own business as well. And it's like that originality aspect of it. Maybe one day it'll be your robot showing up on here talking for you. But until then, it's just two people talking, right? That's it.
Authentic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You had said before, read all the books, speaking to the girls, right? What books come to mind right now to say like, oh, this book or that book would be a great one to check out, or this author perhaps?
Oh, yeah. So great question. You're really putting me on the spot here.
Oh, you're going to take time. It doesn't have to be the best book. It could be like a book or something that's like, oh, this is a really, really good one or something like that.
Yeah.
I just saw Mel Robbins came out with a book. I think it was like in December. And I just saw these clips of like the let them theory. Like if people are bothering you, just let them. Or if they're going to give you a hard time, like let them, that kind of thing. So brand new book. Have not read it, but it just popped up in my feed today. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So I don't know if that triggered anything for you.
So there's a book that I recently read. It's called Dare to Lead. Really good. It's got really great like management tactics. Then I've got how leaders can inspire accountability, act like a leader, think like a leader. There's a ton of really, really great books that you can like read on or listen to on leadership. And that's really helped me just kind of learn how to manage my team. And have you ever heard of What the Heck is EOS?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that has been like pivotal book for me in terms of leading my teams, in terms of leading my businesses. I also have a couple of side businesses that have been very tough to manage. Total different industry. But that book, What the Heck is EOS, has been like very important piece of how I organize my leadership teams.
Yep. Yeah. We have a company we do a podcast with, and that's like their whole culture building thing and their systems and processes for everything. My wife works at a company and that's how they operate their company as well. So yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. And you obviously listen to books, but you also read them. Like I know the listening is like this massive unlock kind of a term, but it is right. It's just like you can listen at all these different times now, but how are you consuming content like that? Is it?
I honestly, right now, I'm only listening to books. I don't have a minute in my life to sit down and so like, you have 3 kids, you know what laundry is like. So if I'm folding laundry, if I'm doing the dishes, I just plug it in. Instead of listening to music now, when I exercise, I go out for a run. I'm training for a couple of marathons this year. And
oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me, like instead of listening to music, now I listen to audiobooks.
Yeah. Do you bounce around? Or are you like saying, I start my book and I listen to the end of it? Or am I like, oh, I'm kind of in the mood for this one. I need to walk faster, so I need a different narrator? Or how?
So it depends. Like, it depends how they make me feel.
Yeah, yeah.
I listened to a book recently called Hold On to Your Kids. Have you listened to that one?
I have not.
And it was like making me sad and depressed. I was like, let's change this, and I'll listen to it when I feel like I need to discipline them a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I switch depending on how it makes me feel. And then there's times that I just want to like listen to Cardi B and go for like a hardcore.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. That's a whole niche. I mean, because now you're with AI, you can create the audio with like AI voices, right? And so we've checked it out, tried to understand it. And when we were just actually publishing a book, we reached out, we wanted the actual narrator. So we wanted the voice actor and all this kind of stuff. So actually, Charlie Thurston, I don't know if you ever read the book Demon Copperhead, which is like a fiction book, right? And it was like maybe an 18-hour Audible book, and he won an award for it. But we were able to get him to come be the narrator. But to go through that process, it's such a creative process. And to have someone like that individual who's that talented come on and read the book and hear his voice and the way he goes about it, it's all human, right? And there's mistakes in it. And he knows there's gonna be mistakes in it. But it's his voice and he's bringing characters to life. There's an aspect of that is just not replaceable. Now, you can use AI tools to help final edit it and cut things up and to search for stuff. And so again, it's a leverage tool, but like just thinking about Audible, like it's a whole nother industry. And we've seen Spotify, you've seen Amazon, they're investing billions into podcasting and audiobooks. So this is a real thing because of all the stuff that you just talked about. When am I going to get a chance to read? I mean, I do all forms of it, whether it's a written book and Amazon or listening to it. But to get into that experience of what it's like behind the scenes to create that book, to spend all that time with it, it's fascinating. And it's a very creative space to go. And I think it's similar to like, it's different, but it's having a real conversation and getting into the humanness of it. I don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, like going back to kids, like you have kids. I'm sure you've watched Disney movies.
Oh yeah, a few, yeah.
Yeah. But like the voices behind each character, are human and hold so much emotion and make the character who they are. And so, yeah, would Moana be the same if Dwayne Johnson wasn't the one who was doing the vocals, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how things evolve and how good these get. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like a Will Arnett. He's from Toronto or went to school in Toronto for a while. And he's Lego Batman, which is like one of our favorite movies with our kids when they were growing up. But he's in so many other things. And then they recognize him from that. Like, oh, that, and they see him in the commercial. And it just brings out this character that only he could do. I get it. AI can mimic it. But yeah, it'll be fascinating. Mm-hmm. For your business, and I just brought up Canada, but not to try to build a transition in here, but I just did. But Canada, like doing business, and I would imagine you're doing business all over the world, or is it focused in Canada, working in the United States?
Yeah, so it's a global company. We have customers everywhere, but I would say that the majority of our clientele is from the US.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's just the borders are down. It's much easier to transact with people all over the world, easy to hop on a call and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people doing SEO and content in the US. So it's something that they need.
Tell me, Originality.ai, like, who's it for? If I'm looking for something in that space, like, why would I, not the sales pitch, but like just about Originality.ai and who's it for?
Yeah, for sure. So it was built for content marketers. So people who are creating, publishing content and who just like want to, make sure that or just to understand. It doesn't necessarily mean that you don't want to publish AI. It just like gives you the knowledge, informed decisions about what you're going to publish. And that's kind of what we're for. And so if you're publishing content and you want to make sure that you're not going to get penalized by Google and that you're not plagiarizing, or that you just had like a fair exchange with a writer, then using a tool like Originality is kind of your best bet.
Yeah. When you go to Grammarly, I know they have an AI thing on the side of it. That's going to be different, I would imagine, than what you guys are doing because you're training for it. And they're just kind of looking for the most common tendencies, I suppose.
Yeah. So they have AI detection. It's not very good. I hope I don't get trouble for saying that.
That's okay.
Yeah, it's super accurate.
We're being honest here. Yeah.
Yeah, they do have an AI detection model. But when you've come late out of the gate with these things, you're just not going to be as powerful or accurate.
Yeah. And they're focused on a different type of thing, right? Like what they do is really good. It's just they're adding tools.
Yeah, they're adding tools just like we are, right? So, similar space, we compete in certain ways, but not total overlap.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, and where do we go to learn about Originality, connect with you?
Yeah, you can visit our website, check us out. We've got a bunch of like free tools that you can use if you don't want to pay for it. But then, yeah, you can also, we do a bunch of really cool studies to understand like what platforms are leveraging AI. And so if you want to learn more about that and understand and follow along kind of like live updates on how Google seems to be approaching the AI problem, I guess, then our website or LinkedIn is a good place to go.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, well, you guys are doing the education for it, and I think that's what we all need, right? Because it's a fascinating place. There's no like, oh, this is how it's going to be. We just don't know. But to educate yourself on it, anyone who's creating content, whether you're hiring a company to do it or you're actually the one doing it, I think education obviously is key. It's always key, right? Like we talk about, as I've analyzed, it's totally out of bounds on this, but it's like sports betting. Like it's becoming such a massive thing that one of the biggest things that we need is education. And going back to another conversation we had earlier is ethics. So it's all these different things that are making such a wave. Okay, we need to understand it better. We understand the ethics of it, how it's going to impact everything. Is this because this is, far reaching, right? And so I think a lot of people that take this stuff seriously are going to do all of those different things. They're going to read, they're going to listen to books, they're going to go to your website and
yeah, I'm only laughing because my husband is like obsessed with sports betting right now.
yeah.
I think, I think I think it just came on so quick, and like these apps make it so accessible. But it's also changed the way that he's consumed sports, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, made him care about things that like don't matter, like how many shots somebody gets on net. It's been funny to watch. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, those things just went crazy. DraftKings and FanDuel, they were doing fantasy sports, and then they saw something happen, and then sports gambling became legal. And now it's like it's in 38 states. So I assume Canada it's legalized.
Yeah.
In different provinces. Okay.
We've got FanDuel. Yeah. I think it can be harmless, but I think that there is like definitely an addictive thing with it, and people need to get informed and
they need to be understanding of it. Yeah, well, there's a lot of comparison. We work with a lot of mental health companies, and they relate it to the opioid crisis because it's cheap. It's not cheap. It can get very expensive, but in the beginning, it's very cheap. You can place bets for $1, $5. It's very easily accessible. You don't have to tell anybody about it. All these things match on that, and it's going after young people, right? People who are in college. And we've seen things, and there's studies out there that financial aid is being used because, like, if you're a sophomore, for example, and you don't live on campus, they send you some of the financial aid money to pay for your apartment, let's say, and they're using that money to bet on sports, right? Or they have these underground rings going on where they don't want to tell their parents. So they're like kind of have this exchange going on at universities now. And that's crazy stuff. So again, it can be very harmless and they can go into this other place. But to that point of like education, understanding it, ethics, advertising that goes into it, and who are we targeting? And it's just a lot of stuff going on in the world today.
a lot of stuff there for sure. And like we all know that 19-year-old boys their brains are not fully developed and not for a few years there. So is it ethical to be targeting that demographic for that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things in the world today, but there's a lot of information out there too. It's just when we take a step back and sit down and look at it and understand it and have conversations like this. So
totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Maddie, I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. I love learning about all your different perspectives of this, but this is great.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been super fun.
This is a Quiet Loud Studios production, the podcast network where reflection meets amplification.